All right, guys. So let's start reviewing. This is going to be a long video. Algebra 1, Chapter 8b, Factoring Study Guide. Okay, so if I look here, the only thing I can factor out, let me zoom in a little bit, is a y. So just because we're factoring doesn't mean you're always going to be splitting that middle term, right? Sometimes it's only a GCF you can look for. So I would factor out a y, and I would have 7 y to the 7th now, not 8th, because I took one of those y's away, plus 20. All right, then I look over here, and don't forget, guys, you've got to think GCF. All right, especially like when we're talking numbers, GCF. Super lame, but it helps you remember. Okay, and the GCF here is 5, as far as a number goes, the greatest common factor. And then if I'm looking for a variable to pull out, they all have an a in common, and I need to look for the a with the smallest exponent. So that would just be a by itself. All right, well then, if I divide everything out, 25 divided by 5 is 5. If it's a to the third and I took one of the a's away, I would have a to the second. B to the second, well, I didn't take a b, so that just stays the same. Minus, well, negative 15 divided by 5 is 3. I took one of the a's away, so it's just a by itself. B still stays the same, and I basically took that term away, so in order to hold its place, I'm going to put a 1 there. Okay, and then if I look here at my next one, number 3, I see that it has 4 terms, so that's technically factoring by grouping, right? Grouping. Got to make sure I don't write grouping. So grouping, and I look here and I say, oh gosh, okay, well, they both have an x in common, and an x with the smallest exponent would be x to the second. And I can factor that out and have x plus 3 left over. And then over here, I look and I think, oh, well, all I can factor out is a 4. So I take out that 4 and I have x plus 3. Well, I need to check and make sure that I have matchy-matchy parentheses, which I do. So then I take my 2 GCFs, x plus 2, or x squared plus 4 in one parenthesis, and x plus 3 in another. All right, same thing, 4 terms. So again, I'm going to factor by grouping. I'm going to look here and see that, oh, they're both divisible by 3. That's their GCF. And they both have an x, so I have to take the x with the smallest exponent, which would be x squared. So I'm factoring out a 3x squared. And I'll be left with, well, 3 divided by 3 is 1. And I can write the 1 if I want. I don't have to, but I would have x to the first, or just x by itself. I would prefer to write this just x. All right, and then 9x squared divided by 3x would simply be a minus 3, right? Because that was a negative 9. Now I look over here and see what I can factor out, and they're both divisible by 2, so I would factor out a 2, and I'd be left with an x minus 3, and then, oh, look, there's my matchy-matchy parentheses, and I'll take the 2 terms that I factored out, 3x plus 2 in one parenthesis, and x minus 3 in the other parenthesis. And again, I have 4 terms, so it will be factoring by grouping. But look at this third term. That third term this time is negative. So I've got to remember, when I get to this second bracket here, I got to factor out a negative. I look here and I think, oh gosh, well, they're both divisible by 5, so that makes that part simple. And then x squared, because that's the x with the smallest exponent. And I'm going to have left x to the 5 divided by 5 is simply 1. And x cubed, take 2 of those x's away, you just have an x. And 5x squared divided by 5x squared is 1. Over here I look and I'm like, oh gosh, they don't have anything in common, so all I can factor out is a negative 1. And that would leave me with x minus 1. And again, I have matchy-matchy parentheses, so I would have 5x squared minus 1 and x minus 1 for the other parenthesis. And number 6. Again, I have 4 terms, so it'll be factoring by grouping. Paying attention to that third sign has a negative. So I'm going to look here and see that the only thing that they have in common is an x squared. All right, this is going to become 2x, right? Because the 2 stays about the same, and x cubed, take 2 of those x's away, I just have 1x. And then plus 5, because I took that x squared away. All right, then I look over here and think, I'm pulling out a negative for sure, and what they can both be divided into is a 4. So I end up with 2x plus 5, and hooray, hooray, I have my matching parentheses, and in one is x squared minus 4, and in the other is 2x plus 5. And you are done with your first page. Okay, so let's look here. Well, if I look at number 8, I can go ahead and I can just go ahead and factor this either by splitting the middle term, or I can also see that it's a perfect square trinomial. Because look, there's 2 plus signs. These are both perfect squares and perfect squares. So if I take the square root of x squared, I'll end up with x. And if I take the square root of 81, I end up with 9. And you can always check, because what you do is you take the term that you've taken the square root of. So 9 times 2 equals 18. And if that matches up with your middle term, you know you've done the right job. Multiply these two together. So 9 times 2 is 18, and then don't forget that x. So you technically have your factors. They're both positive. X plus 9 times x plus 9, or if you'd like to write it the more professional way, it'll be x plus 9 and then squared. Okay, well this one is not, so I'll put perfect square trinomial just so you know. Perfect square trinomial. All right, and then here, well, not a perfect square trinomial. 45 is not a perfect square, so we're going to go ahead and split the middle term, or some of you guys may see, oh, it's a 1. I know the trick to that. I don't need to split the middle term. But multiply the first and last term. 45 goes to the top. The middle brother that nobody likes, 14, goes to the bottom. What adds to negative positive 14 and multiplies to 45 would be 9 and 5. So we're going to split the middle term, right? We're going to have a 9x and a 5x, and we're going to bring down our first and last term. So x squared and 45. And then we're just, and that was a positive 5x. And then we're just going to factor by grouping. All right, well, what multiplies, or what can these both go into? So you factor out an x, and you're left with an x plus 9. And these both have a 5 that they can go into, so you factor out a 5, and you're left with an x plus 9. Matchy-matchy parentheses, hooray. So I have x plus 5 and x plus 9. The thing about it is, whenever there's a 1 right there, you can simply look at what you factored out here and know that I can just do my parentheses that way. So let's try it that way if you want. So we're going to do negative 54 at the top, and the middle brother that nobody likes at the bottom, right? Negative 54 times 1 is negative 54. And what multiplies to negative 54 but adds to a negative 3? Well, that would be a negative 9 and a positive 6. When it is equal to 1, these are the only two numbers that you need. You would know that it's x minus 9 and x plus 6. If you are not comfortable doing that, we can do it the factor by grouping way. So we will see, still a 1 here. We're going to do 12 at the top of our x, and the negative 7, the middle brother that nobody likes, at the bottom. and we'll think negative 3 and negative 4. They multiply to a positive 12 and add to a negative 7. So we've technically split the middle term, right? So negative 3x minus 4x. We bring down the last term, and we bring down the first term. So x squared. And then we simply factor by grouping. All right, well, what can they both go into? Well, this can have an x, so we're going to have x, and this will be x minus 3. And this, oh, whoa, look, that third term was negative, so we're factoring out a negative, which would be a negative 4 that they can both be divided out to, and this would become an x minus 3. And once again, as I drop my pen, my parentheses match. So I have an x minus 4 and an x minus 3. Look familiar? Negative 3, negative 4, negative 3, negative 4. Okay, well, now we've gotten to number 11 where we cannot factor that simple basic way. We do have to factor by grouping or splitting the middle term. So again, I multiply my first and last term and get 30. I bring my middle brother that nobody likes to the bottom. And I think what multiplies to 30 and adds to 11? Well, that's 6 and 5. So I bring down my first term, 2x squared plus 6x, this term, and use the other term, 5x, and then bring down my last term, 15. And I get a factor by grouping. So I look for what my GCF is here, and I can factor out a 2x, and I'm left with an x plus 3. And over here I look, what can I factor out? Oh, they're both divisible by 5, so I end up with an x plus 3. I have my matchy parentheses, so I have 2x plus 5 in one and x plus 3 in another. Okay, same thing here. Gonna look for a GCF first, no GCF. Okay, gonna multiply. I end up with 60 and a negative 32. Well, negative 30 times negative 2 would equal a positive 60, and negative 30 plus negative 2 would add to a negative 32. So I'm going to bring down my first term, 3x squared, minus 30x minus 2x plus 20. And lo and behold, my third term is negative, so I'm going to have to factor out a negative at some point. And now here we go factoring. So I look for my GCF, and I have a 3x that I can factor out, and I'm left with an x minus 10. And here I look and see what I can factor out, and I have a negative 2, and I'm left with an x minus 10. Oh, yay, my parentheses match. Here they are matching. So I have a 3x minus 2, the terms that I factored out in one parenthesis, and my matchy in another parenthesis, x minus 10. Okay, so here I go, factoring away. Now I look and I see, okay, still no GCF, so I'm just going to factor the way that I know. 6 times 7 is the 42, negative 17. Now, what multiplies to negative 42 and adds to a negative 17? This is a little bit harder of one, which would be a negative 14 and a negative 3. It's just harder to think of those numbers. They're a little out of the ordinary. So I bring down my first term, per usual, x squared minus 14x minus 3x, and then bring down my last term, 7. Again, don't forget this third term is negative. If I sound like a broken record, that's my plan, because hopefully it will sink in. And I look here, and I think, oh, I got a 2x that I can factor out, and I'm left with a 3x minus 7. And then I look here, what can I factor out? Oh, shoot. They have nothing in common, so I'm just going to factor out a negative 1, and I'll have 3x minus 7. My parentheses match again. Hooray! I did it right. I have 2x minus 1 in one parenthesis and 3x minus 7 in the other. And we are moving right along. Okay, so first thing I've been telling you to look for when you factor is a GCF. GCF. And do these terms all have something in common? Why, yes, they do. They're all divisible. Oops, let me let it focus and let you see. By 5. So I'm going to factor out a 5 from all of these terms. I will be left with 2x squared plus 13x plus 20. If you do not factor out a GCF first and you write a parenthesis answer like we've been writing, it will be wrong. You will have missed a step. So now I can make my x and go ahead and factor the way that I'm used to. Hold on to this 5. If I were you, I'd write it in the answer line right next to it. So 5 right there. And then no, I still have my parentheses that I need to fill in. So 2 times 20 is 40. Still taking that middle brother nobody likes to the bottom, which is 13. What multiplies to 40 and adds to 13 would be 5 and 8. So bring down this first term, 2x squared plus 5x. And then my next term would be plus 8x plus 20. And then we'll factor out our GCF. So what goes here? X. That can only be factored out, which leaves this as 2x plus 5. And what can be factored out here? Oh, only a 4. So that leaves us with 2x plus 5. All right, I have my matchy-matchy parentheses, which is exactly what I want. So I will take these two terms, my x and my positive 4, and write them in one parenthesis, and my 2x plus 5 and write it in the other. I really stress, hey, keep track of that number that you divided out in the beginning, and then factor the rest of your, or then write it in your answer space and then factor. Okay, so again, GCF, right? They have a term, one term in common, and that's an x. So I'm going to factor out an x. So x squared minus 4x minus 45. The x goes away. And now I can simply factor this. All right, I'll multiply my first and my last term and get a negative 45 and bring my middle brother that nobody likes to the bottom. All right, what multiplies to this would be a negative 9 and a positive 5. Because once I factored this out, this is only a 1 here, so I could take these two numbers and write my parentheses. Oh, P.S. I forgot to put my x down like I just told you guys to do. But for those of us who are a little lost here, let's go ahead and do it the way we're used to. So I'm going to bring down my first term, x squared minus 9x and plus 5x minus 45. Right, so I have my 4 terms. All right, I factor out an x, and I'll have x minus 9 in one parenthesis. And I look here, and I have a 5. So x minus 9 in another parenthesis. My parentheses are matchy-matchy. Hooray. So I will do x plus 5 in one parenthesis, right, that positive 5. And x minus 9 in another. Okay. This one, difference of 2 squares. In class, you would have heard me refer to it as dots, difference of 2 squares. But is this a perfect square? Yes, x squared is a perfect square. Is 9 a perfect square? Yes, 9 is a perfect square. Are they separated by a subtraction sign? Yes, they are. So x squared becomes x. 9 squared becomes 3. you have to write it as a positive and negative. So x minus 3 and x plus 3. That would be your answer. Moving along to this next one, I would see, oh, this is a perfect square. This is a perfect square. And again, I would take the square roots. It is dots. Two perfect squares separated by a subtraction sign. Just because they have an x and a y, don't let it scare you. Right? They're still perfect squares, right? 100x squared. We would take the square root, which would be 10x. 121y squared, we would take the square root, and that would be 11y. Same thing, a parenthesis with 10x minus 11y and 10x plus 11y. Okay, so here you're like, oh, it kind of looks like a dots, but I don't know. That's because you have to factor out the GCF first. All right, they're both divisible by 2, right? So you would factor out a 2. You would be left with x squared minus 100. And now, oh yeah, perfect square. Oh yeah, perfect square. Separated by a subtraction sign, yes. That would be dots. So we would put this 2 over there that we factored out. And then I would take my square root of x, or my x squared, take the square root of it, which would be x, and 100, take the square root of that, and it would be 10. So x plus 10, x minus 10, and that would be my answer. All right. Oh, perfect. Yay, this is a perfect square. Yay, this is a perfect square. Oh, snap. There's a positive right there. It would not be dots. And in fact, there's nothing else you can factor out of this. They don't have an x in common. They don't have a 9 in common. So this would simply be prime, or just the answer that it is, prime, or x squared plus 81. There's nothing you can factor out of there. All right, well, moving along. Right here. Okay, so I want to split my middle term. Oh, wait. They're all divisible by 5. I have a GCF here. All right, they're all divisible by 5. So I'm going to take my 5. I'm going to go ahead and write my parentheses over here just so I don't forget to put that 5 as part of my answer. All right, I factor out the 5. I end up with 2x squared plus 15x plus 7. And now I can start by splitting my middle term. 2 times 7 is 14. Bring the middle brother down that nobody likes. And 15. What multiplies to 14 adds to 15? Well, that would be 14 and 1. All right, and so I'm going to have 2x squared plus 14x plus 1x plus 7. Bring my first and my last terms down. Remember, that's where this 2x squared came from in the 7. And I'll go ahead and look for my GCF. So 2x, which is going to leave me with x plus 7. And there's nothing in common that I can factor out, just a 1. And I'll end up with an x plus 7. Okay, so I'll take my 2 terms that I factored out, 2x plus 1 in one parenthesis, and x plus 7 in another parenthesis. And woohoo, we're done with the 3rd page. And now for the 4th page. If the area of a rectangle, so the area, remember, area is base times height, so they've already multiplied them together, can be represented by 3x squared minus x minus 10, and the length is represented by x minus 2, determine the width of the rectangle. So we want to factor, length times width. I've got geometry on the brain. Length times width, right, since they're giving you your width. which means we're going to look for a GCF. Oh, they don't have one. So I'm going to do 3x squared minus x minus 10. And I'm going to have a negative 30 at the top by multiplying the 3 and the negative 10 and a negative 1 at the bottom. And what multiplies to negative 30 and adds to a negative 1 would be a negative 6 and a 5. So let's do 3x squared minus 6x plus 5x minus 10. Bring down the first term, bring down the last term, the middle terms that I split. Factor by grouping. What goes into both of these? 3x. I'm left with an x minus 2. And a 5. Factor out of 5. And I'm left with an x minus 2. And matchy parentheses. Why, yes. So I know that I have a 3x plus 5 for one parenthesis and an x minus 2 for the other. Well, it already told me that the length is x minus 2, so I already knew this. What I didn't know was the width, but now I know that the width was 3x plus 5. And when they multiplied those together, they got 3x squared minus x minus 10. Okay, so almost done here. Find the sum of the polynomial and write your answer in standard form. Well, I'm going to look for like terms. All right, and I see that these are like terms, 2x squared and 5x squared, which would be 7x squared. And I see that this is a negative 5x and this is a negative 3x. So that would be negative 8x. And this is a 6 and this is a 4. When I add those two together, I end up with 10. Okay, a little blast from the past. Here we go. And I have this negative. Don't forget that distributes to everything in here. So this becomes a negative 4x and squared, negative 2x, and a positive 2. All right, well, I'm going to look for my like terms. And I have a 7x squared and a negative 4x squared, which is going to give me a 3x squared. And then I look and I have a negative 3x and a negative 2x, which is going to give me a negative 5x. And then I just have one constant, just that 2, which is a positive 2. So I would have a positive 2. And your last question, it says multiply. Remember, you are not distributing this. It is technically 3x minus 2y times 3x minus 2y. All right, I'll just go ahead and do the box method. It seems to show up a little clearer in videos, and have 3x minus 2y and 3x minus 2y. All right, I will multiply these and get 9x squared. I will multiply these two and get negative 6xy. I'll multiply these two and get negative 6xy. And multiply these two and get negative 4y. Positive 4y squared. Now I see that these are my only like terms, so I will combine those. But first I will have 9x squared minus 12xy plus 4y squared. And that is your study guide. Good luck on the test. Just a little over 29 minutes. Adios.